By 1944, armorers across every front were documenting the same problem. Weapons were coming back wrong, barrels shortened, triggers filed, stocks hacked apart with bayonets, modifications that no manual authorized and no regulation permitted. Military discipline was clear. Government property was not to be altered. Soldiers caught with modified weapons faced confiscation, docked pay, and in serious cases, courts-martial. But regulations written in rear echelon offices rarely survived the front lines. Men facing death adapted what they carried. Sergeants looked the other way. Officers pretended not to notice. Across every theater, soldiers quietly reshaped their weapons into something the factories never intended, because survival mattered more than compliance. Some modifications worked, others failed catastrophically. All of them broke the rules. These are the 10 banned field modifications soldiers used anyway. Number 10. Helmet padding and liner hacks. The comfort that could kill you. Standard issue helmets were designed for one purpose: to stop shrapnel. They were not designed for comfort. They were not designed for long marches through heat or cold. And they were certainly not designed with the assumption that soldiers would alter them. Regulations were explicit. The liner system was to remain intact. Modifications to padding, suspension, or fit were unauthorized. Armorers warned that any change to the interior could compromise the helmet's ability to absorb impact and protect against concussion. But regulations did not have to wear the helmet for 18 hours in a jungle, or through a frozen night in the Ardennes, or while crawling through rubble in a shattered city. Soldiers did. So they modified them anyway. Some stuffed extra cloth beneath the liner, rags, torn shirts, strips of blanket. Others removed sections of the suspension system entirely, believing a looser fit would reduce headaches and fatigue. In the Pacific, men cut ventilation holes into the liner fabric to reduce heat buildup. In Europe, soldiers added layers of cardboard or cork to insulate against the cold. The results were unpredictable. Improvised padding shifted during movement, creating pressure points or leaving gaps in protection. Removed suspension webbing meant the helmet no longer absorbed impact the way it was designed to, and a glancing blow could now transmit force directly to the skull. Soldiers who modified their liners sometimes reported worse headaches, not fewer. And in documented cases, men who had altered their helmets suffered head injuries that an unmodified helmet might have prevented. Officers knew it was happening. Sergeants turned a blind eye when morale demanded it. But the modifications were never approved, and the consequences were never advertised. The helmet was meant to protect. Sometimes the soldier's own hands made it less likely to do so. Number 9. Non-regulation slings and weapon straps. The carry that wasn't authorized. Every rifle came with a sling. Every sling was designed to meet specifications: length, width, attachment points, material strength. The regulations assumed that soldiers would carry their weapons exactly as designed, and that the sling would serve its intended purpose: transport, stability, and control. But in the field, the regulation sling often became a liability. Leather cracked in the cold. Canvas stretched in the wet. Metal fittings rattled against the receiver, giving away positions at night. And the standard length, designed for parade ground carry, often placed the rifle in exactly the wrong position for the rapid movement that combat demanded. So soldiers made their own: lengths of rope, strips of captured equipment, leather cut from belts, boots, or vehicle interiors. Some men fashioned single-point slings that let the rifle hang freely, ready to be raised in an instant. Others created makeshift two-point systems that held the weapon tighter against the body during long patrols. None of it was authorized. Quartermasters refused to issue replacement parts for improvised slings. Officers conducted inspections specifically to identify and confiscate non-regulation carry systems. The concern was standardization. If every soldier carried his weapon differently, training suffered, handling became unpredictable, and supply chains could not keep pace. But the men who made these modifications weren't thinking about supply chains. They were thinking about the moment they needed the rifle in their hands and whether the regulation sling would let them get it there in time. Some of those improvised slings failed. Stitching tore, rope frayed, weapons dropped at the worst possible moment. Documented incidents describe rifles lost during river crossings or night movements when the improvised strap gave way without warning. But for every failure, there were soldiers who believed their modification had saved them, even if they could never prove it. The sling was meant to be simple. In war, nothing ever was. Would you trust a regulation sling or the one you built yourself? Let me know which you'd carry. Number 8. Homemade grips, tape wraps, and grip shaping. The feel that regulations forgot. A rifle's grip was designed by engineers who never had to fire it with frozen hands, or wet hands, or hands slick with blood and mud after hours of fighting without rest. Regulations specified the exact dimensions of stocks, grips, and handguards. Soldiers were expected to adapt to the weapon, not the other way around. Modifications to grip surfaces were explicitly forbidden, both because they altered the weapon's profile and because they introduced variables that armorers could not account for during maintenance and repair. But in combat, feel mattered. Soldiers wrapped grips in cloth, tape, or strips of rubber cut from tires and equipment. They carved grooves into wooden stocks to improve purchase. They added layers of cord or leather to build up surfaces that felt too thin in cold weather. Some filed down sharp edges that dug into palms during sustained firing. The modifications were personal, shaped to the hand of the man who made them, and they were never approved. When inspections caught improvised grip work, the consequences varied. Sometimes the modification was simply removed and the soldier warned. Other times, pay was docked or the weapon was confiscated for reissue. In rear areas, such changes were treated as vandalism of government property. At the front, enforcement was often quieter. Sergeants who saw tape-wrapped grips during combat patrols rarely said a word because they understood what the regulations did not. Still, the modifications carried risks. Tape absorbed moisture and froze in winter, creating a slick surface instead of a secure one. Carved grooves weakened wood, leading to cracks and splits under stress. Wrapped materials sometimes interfered with the action, catching on moving parts during reloads or malfunctions. Soldiers accepted those risks because the alternative was a grip that did not fit their hand, and in the chaos of combat, that mismatch could cost everything. Number 7. Removed or altered. Iron sights, the aim. That command never approved. Iron sights were standardized for a reason. Every rifle was zeroed at the factory. Every soldier was trained on the same sight picture. Doctrine assumed that consistency across millions of weapons would produce consistency on the battlefield, and any modification to the sighting system threatened that assumption. Regulations made it clear. Sights were not to be altered, adjusted beyond specified limits, or removed under any circumstances. But soldiers discovered what engineers had not accounted for. Factory sights were often set for ranges that combat rarely reached. In the close quarters fighting of towns, forests, and trenches, the carefully calibrated rear aperture or the finely adjusted front post became obstacles rather than aids. Soldiers found themselves fighting at distances where instinct mattered more than precision, and the sights only slowed them down. So they changed them. Some removed rear apertures entirely, preferring a clear view down the barrel. Others filed front sights lower, adjusting for the ranges they actually encountered. A few replaced issued sights with captured enemy components believed to offer faster acquisition. In the Pacific, soldiers were known to wrap front sights in white thread or paint to improve visibility in jungle shadow. None of it was authorized. Armorers warned that altered sights destroyed the weapon's zero, that a rifle modified in the field could no longer be trusted to hit where it was aimed. And they were often right. Documented cases describe soldiers who modified their sights only to find their rounds striking inches or feet from their intended point of impact. But other soldiers swore by their changes. They argued that a faster sight picture, even an imperfect one, was better than a slow, precise aim that arrived too late. Command never agreed. The sights were designed by experts. Soldiers were expected to use them as issued, and when they did not, the consequences, whether punishment or a missed shot, were theirs to bear. Number 6. Sawed or cut rifle stocks, the weapon that no longer fit the manual. The rifle stock was never meant to be shortened. Designed for average heights and standard carry positions, the stock determined how the weapon balanced, how it absorbed recoil, and how it transferred energy during firing. Cutting or reshaping the stock altered all of those characteristics, and regulations made it clear that such modifications were forbidden. But regulations were written by men who had never crawled through a hedgerow with a full-length rifle, catching on every branch, or climbed into a tank hatch with a weapon too long to maneuver, or fought house to house, where an extra inch of length could mean the difference between clearing a doorway and dying in it. So soldiers cut their stocks. This was a simple, brutal answer to a pressing problem. Using bayonets, saws, or whatever tools they could find, men shortened wooden stocks to improve handling in close quarters. Some removed inches from the buttstock to reduce overall length. Others carved out sections of the forestock to shed weight or improve grip. In extreme cases, entire stocks were replaced with improvised frames built from salvaged materials. The results were often crude. Shortened stocks reduced the rifle's ability to absorb recoil, punishing the shooter's shoulder with every round fired. Cut wood splintered under stress, sometimes failing entirely during combat. Weapons that had been carefully balanced at the factory became front-heavy or awkward in the hand. Officers who discovered cut stocks treated them as serious violations. The weapon was no longer standard issue. It was damaged property. Soldiers caught with modified stocks faced confiscation, disciplinary action, and in some cases courts-martial, but at the front, enforcement was inconsistent. Sergeants who understood the reality of close combat often looked the other way, because they knew the man carrying that shortened rifle had made a choice that doctrine never acknowledged, a choice between what the weapon was designed to do and what the situation demanded. If you had to fight with a rifle you did not choose, which would you trust, the one designed by engineers or the one reshaped by the man who had to survive with it? Number 5. Magazine and feed modifications, the reload that was not supposed to exist. Magazines were designed for reliability. Every spring tension, every follower angle, every feed lip was calculated to ensure ammunition would move from magazine to chamber without failure. Regulations specified that magazines were to be used as issued. No modifications, no alterations, no improvisation. The reasoning was sound. A modified magazine could misfeed. A weakened spring could fail to push rounds into position. An altered follower could jam the action at the worst possible moment. In a firefight, a failed reload was often a death sentence, and yet soldiers modified their magazines anyway. Some filed feed lips to reduce friction during rapid reloads. Others replaced springs with stiffer wire salvaged from other equipment, believing it would improve feeding in cold weather. A few soldiers were known to weld or tape magazines together, creating improvised extended systems that held more rounds than regulations allowed. In the Soviet Union, soldiers sometimes modified PPSH, 41 drum magazines, to accept stick magazines from other weapons, or the other way around. German troops were documented altering MP40 magazines in attempts to reduce the feeding problems that plagued the design. American soldiers experimented with M1 carbine magazines, trying to increase capacity beyond the standard 15 rounds. None of it was authorized. Armorers warned that any modification to the magazine system introduced unpredictable variables. A filed feed lip might work perfectly, or it might shear off under stress. A stiffened spring might improve feeding, or it might fail entirely after a few dozen cycles. The consequences were documented. Soldiers who modified their magazines sometimes found themselves with jammed weapons at critical moments. Others discovered that their changes had damaged the receiver or bolt face, turning a minor modification into a major malfunction. But the modifications continued because soldiers believed that any change was better than accepting a system that already failed them. Regulations insisted otherwise. The battlefield decided who was right. Number 4. Improvised bayonet and blade mounts. The edge that didn't belong. The bayonet was a weapon of last resort. Designed to fit specific rifles with specific mounting systems, it was meant to transform the infantry rifle into a short spear, a psychological weapon as much as a physical one. Regulations governed every aspect of its use: how it was carried, how it was attached, and how it was maintained. What regulations did not anticipate was that soldiers would attach blades that were never designed for the rifle at all. In every theater of the war, men improvised. Captured enemy bayonets were fitted to Allied rifles, sometimes successfully, sometimes catastrophically. Soldiers fashioned mounts from wire, metal straps, or carved wood to attach trench knives, fighting knives, or locally made blades to their weapons. In the Pacific, some men attached machetes or bolo knives to their rifles, creating improvised polearms for jungle fighting. The reasoning was simple. Standard bayonets were often too short for the close quarters combat soldiers actually faced. Or they were lost, broken, or simply unavailable when needed. An improvised blade, even an imperfect one, was better than no blade at all. But the modifications carried serious risks. Improvised mounts were rarely secure. Blades came loose during thrusts, leaving the soldier exposed. Captured bayonets designed for different rifles often fit poorly, wobbling or detaching entirely under stress. Some improvised mounts actually damaged the rifle's barrel or receiver, compromising the weapon's ability to fire. Officers treated improvised blade mounts as serious violations, not just of equipment regulations, but of safety doctrine. A soldier with an unsecured blade was a danger to himself and everyone around him, and still the modifications appeared. In the chaos of close combat, soldiers reached for whatever edge they could find, even if that edge was never meant to be there. Number 3. Trigger jobs and filed sear surfaces. The pull that could get you killed. The trigger mechanism was the heart of the rifle. Every component, the trigger itself, the sear, the disconnector, the springs, was designed to ensure that the weapon fired only when the soldier intended it to. Regulations made it absolutely clear trigger mechanisms were not to be modified under any circumstances. The reasoning was not merely bureaucratic. A trigger that was too light could fire unintentionally. A sear that was improperly filed could slip, causing the weapon to discharge during handling or transport. An altered disconnector could turn a semi-automatic rifle into an uncontrollable automatic, or prevent it from firing at all. These were not theoretical risks. Documented incidents describe soldiers who modified their triggers and suffered accidental discharges that wounded or killed themselves or their comrades. Weapons that had been improved by amateur gunsmiths sometimes failed catastrophically, with bolts slamming forward unexpectedly or hammers falling without warning. And yet, the modifications happened. Soldiers filed sear surfaces to reduce trigger pull weight, believing a lighter trigger would improve accuracy. Others adjusted spring tensions to shorten the travel, creating a hair trigger that fired at the slightest pressure. Some removed safeties entirely, preferring the speed of immediate readiness over the security of a mechanical block. Armorers who discovered trigger modifications treated them as among the most serious violations possible. The weapon was immediately confiscated. The soldier faced severe disciplinary action. In some units, modified triggers were considered grounds for court-martial, but enforcement at the front was never consistent. Soldiers who believed their trigger jobs gave them an edge were often willing to accept the risks, both the risk of punishment and the risk of catastrophic failure. The line between a faster shot and an accidental death was measured in thousandths of an inch. Many soldiers never knew which side they were on. If you have made it this far, you understand, this is not about heroes or villains. It is about choices made under pressure, in places where the manual could not follow. Stay with me. The final two entries reveal the modifications that armies feared most. Number 2, barrel shortening and crude recrowning. The cut that changed everything. Of all the unauthorized modifications soldiers made, few were as dangerous or as irreversible as cutting the barrel. The barrel was the soul of the rifle. Its length determined velocity. Its rifling determined accuracy. Its crown, the precisely machined edge at the muzzle, determined whether every round left the weapon cleanly or tumbled uselessly into the dirt. Regulations forbade barrel modification absolutely. Any cut to the barrel destroyed the weapon's ballistic profile. Velocity dropped. Accuracy suffered. And if the crown was damaged or improperly finished, the rifle became effectively useless, a loud, dangerous piece of scrap metal that might send rounds anywhere except the intended target. Soldiers cut them anyway. In close-quarters fighting, urban combat, jungle patrols, trench raids, a shorter barrel meant faster handling. Soldiers used hacksaws, files, and even explosives to shorten barrels by inches, sometimes by half a foot or more. The goal was always the same, a weapon that could be brought to bear faster in tight spaces. The results varied wildly. Some crude recrowning attempts actually preserved reasonable accuracy at short ranges. Others destroyed the weapon entirely. Soldiers who cut their barrels sometimes found their rounds keyholing, striking targets sideways, with no penetration and no lethality. In documented cases, improperly cut barrels ruptured under pressure, injuring or killing the shooter. Officers who discovered shortened barrels treated the modification as destruction of government property. The weapon was confiscated. The soldier faced severe punishment. In some armies, deliberately damaging a weapon was considered sabotage, a charge that carried extreme consequences. And still the cuts were made, because in the moment when survival depended on getting the rifle around a corner first, the soldier holding it decided that doctrine no longer applied. He accepted the risk, and he made the cut. Number 1. homemade suppressors, and flash reduction mods. The silence that could cost you everything. No modification was more forbidden than this. Suppressors were not standard issue for infantry rifles during the Second World War. The technology existed, and specialized weapons like the Delisle carbine and the Welrod pistol proved that, but these were tools of covert operations issued to commando units and intelligence operatives under strict classification. For ordinary soldiers, suppressors were not just unavailable, they were explicitly prohibited. Regulations made it clear any attempt to reduce the sound or flash signature of a standard infantry weapon was unauthorized. The reasoning was partly practical. Improvised suppressors often failed catastrophically, and partly doctrinal. Command did not want soldiers believing they could operate silently when they could not. But soldiers tried anyway. Using whatever materials were available, oil filters, steel tubing, wire mesh, rubber baffles, men constructed crude suppressors in the field. Some worked, reducing the sound of a shot from a sharp crack to a muffled thump. Others did nothing at all. And some failed violently, rupturing under pressure or causing dangerous increases in back pressure that damaged the weapon's action. Flash reduction was attempted more often. Soldiers wrapped muzzles in cloth, attached improvised flash hiders made from tin cans or captured equipment, or even packed mud around the barrel in attempts to hide their position during night fighting. The results were unpredictable. Some methods reduced visible flash. Others caused misfires, barrel obstructions, or dangerous gas venting. The consequences of discovery were severe. Possession of an improvised suppressor, even a non-functional one, was treated as a serious offense in most armies. Soldiers faced confiscation, disciplinary action, and in some cases, accusations of attempting to circumvent rules of engagement or evade identification. The modification was seen as fundamentally different from others, not a survival adaptation, but an attempt to operate outside the boundaries of conventional warfare. And yet, the modifications appeared. In night fighting, in sniping roles, in situations where revealing a position meant death, soldiers reached for silence even when silence was forbidden. They understood the risks, they accepted them, and they pulled the trigger anyway. These were the modifications that armies never wanted, not because they did not work, some of them did, but because they represented something doctrine could not control. The individual soldier's judgment placed above the regulations written to govern him. Every modification on this list carried consequences. Some men were punished, some were injured, some were killed by the very changes they believed would save them. But others survived and credited their survival to choices that no manual ever authorized. The truth of the Second World War was never as clean as the regulations suggested. Soldiers were issued weapons designed by engineers, approved by committees, and tested under controlled conditions. Then they carried those weapons into chaos and made decisions that no committee could anticipate. Some of those decisions were right, some were wrong. All of them were human. The gap between doctrine and survival was never closed. It was simply crossed, one modification at a time, by men who decided that following orders was not the same as staying alive. If you want World War II history without simplification or mythology, subscribe. There's more coming.